And so it begins. Ladies and gentlemen, councillors, welcome to the Planning Committee of Monday. I forgot what the date is today, the 10th of October, thank you. First item on the agenda, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Just Councillor Cranston.
Okay, and we have, we'll see if we've got some all around. Item number 2 are the minutes. The minutes of the last meeting were held on the 5th of September. Is everybody happy that I signed them as an accurate record of the meeting? Yep. Good, thank you very much. Agenda item number 3 is declarations of interest. If you do have an interest, please declare it before we debate the item. And item number 4 is the Local Government Access to Information Act, exclusion of the press and public. We do not have any items today under that heading. So, first application we have today is planning application number 5, former police station magistrates court, which we were minded to refuse at the previous planning application, and we have brought back the reasons for refusal. Over to Ian, I think he's leading on this.
Thank you, Chair. So the good news, first of all, is we're not going to take you back and debate the application in detail so this evening. I think we all agree it had a full hearing last month. Officers heard what you said and took that on board, as you would expect. And so we've taken that away and come back to you this evening with a full set of draft reasons for refusal, and they're in the committee report. However, what's also happened in the intervening period is we've received a request from the applicant, basically for you to consider deferral again, to allow the applicant time to address your concerns and address the stated reasons for refusal, come back and at a later date and present a fresh set of plans and proposals that you can then consider. So we've looked at that suggestion as officers. We feel it's a reasonable thing to do, to allow them the opportunity one more time to address your concerns. That doesn't preclude you from still having those reasons for refusal. I think all the applicant has asked for is a bit more time to consider that. So our recommendation is to allow that time so that the applicant can revise their drawings. They are prepared to go through another design review process, so we can facilitate that. My team here will work with the applicant and their design consultants so that we can see how far we can go in addressing those concerns. So as I say, to repeat, reasons for refusal are there for you this evening. However, we would recommend that before you consider those, that you allow this application to be taken away by the applicant and to come back at a later date with some revised proposals.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to open it up to questions. Just remind everybody, questions are questions and debate is debate. If we could do them both at the right time, that'd be awesome. Thanks very much, Councillor Bialik.
Well, it's not so much a, well, I can frame it. But it was I would be happy to. Things going to be doing that.
You are.
So I would be happy to support it, and you said you didn't want that now, but this is the question: as long as when they come back to us that it's clearly understood, it's not a second bite of the cherry for them to have another go. It is addressing those reasons for the refusal, and those reasons must be addressed with any presentation within the deferral. So as I say, it's clear it's not have another go, see if we're in a better frame of mind that particular night, but to make sure that they address the issues that were the matter of refusal, then I would support, as long as that's my question, Chair.
I would support what you're saying. I don't want to just see a slightly better application. There were some very strong feelings, so I would, as as the chair of the committee, I would want it back on this committee unless there were some significant changes. Councillor Mitchell.
Chair, seem to be audible. It's just a constitutional issue, really. We've just approved minutes where this matter was discussed and was publicly discussed X number of weeks ago in the public domain, and we refused. How can we now?
We were minded to refuse once we were given the reasons for refusal at this meeting.
So are we perfectly constitutional with our rights to revert that decision to a deferral? Because my view would
We're
be
not reverting the decision. We haven't finally made the decision because our reasons for refusal were being brought to this meeting. So we can still refuse it, just to be clear. I want to make that clear. We can refuse this now, or we can choose to defer, and the reasons are there. But we haven't made our final decision because we did not have our reasons for refusal at the last meeting. Okay, so we're not reverting. We haven't made our final decision.
Constitutionally, there's no issue about
Otherwise,
our previous debate and decision being overridden. By
otherwise, it wouldn't be in front of you.
Second point in relation to that, presumably, if we did stick to our original decision, there's nothing stopping the applicant coming back with a fresh application regarding this site, which is effectively what they're doing by the deferral.
Nope, and there's also nothing to stop them taking it to appeal. Okay.
Thank you. I would just like to know if there's any liability opened up to the council in terms of planning law for not making a decision within a specified time.
Funnily enough, I asked exactly the same question, Diana. I will ask the officers to confirm what they know.
Do that now?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
Okay. So planning liability, if the committee is minded to defer the decision, that will be predicated on the applicant agreeing to an extension of time to allow that. That would then effectively give you the time to consider their fresh proposals without that risk of appeal, because they've agreed an extension of time effectively.
So, thank you. In light of the position of the committee last time, which was minded to refuse on quite a considerable number of large areas, is the extent to which the changes are to be made perhaps better described as a fresh application rather than actually an amendment to the existing?
So there are limits to what an applicant can do to change an application while it's being considered. If it goes to so far that it becomes a wholly different scheme, then they would be required to submit a fresh planning application. I think what is being proposed by the applicant is to address the concerns that you have as a committee and the specific reasons for refusal by amending their existing plans. So this would not constitute a fresh planning application, in my view. They're simply amending the proposal. So it will broadly be the same application in terms of the sort of mix of uses, broadly the number of homes, etc., etc. However, the difference will be in terms of how they address the issues. Broadly, the application would be within the parameters that are already there.
Just to reiterate the point that Councillor Bialik and I made before, we can still refuse the application when it's before us. This doesn't mean we have to change our mind at all. Okay, Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Moore.
Quick follow-up point. If the committee was minded to defer, would there still be a public consultation on the deferred application, as distinct from treating it as an extension of the first application, so the public do get a chance to have a second say on the revised plans?
So the whole history of this particular application is there's been a series of significant design amendments during its lifespan, and each time there's been those significant amendments, there has been a reconsultation. I think three in total so far. So this would effectively be a fourth set of revised plans that we would then reconsult before we brought it back to you for consideration.
Okay, last call for questions. I've got Councillor Moore, but anybody else got their hand up now? Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify the technical position, because on page 15 of agenda item 5, the note says the planning committee held on the 5th of September, members resolved to refuse this application. It doesn't say we were minded to, for the following reasons. So it says resolved to refuse this application for the following reasons and ask the Director of City Development to report back to the next planning committee with the full technical reasons for refusal. So the reasons for refusal were outlined in principle, and the referral back to this committee was because of detailing the technical reasons. So I think it's really good that the developer is interested in reviewing the application, but I'm not convinced that what we're being asked to consider is the same as what we agreed at the previous meeting.
Well, I think, to be honest, Councillor Moss has already answered that question, that what you're being asked to consider is not to set aside your reasons for refusal, that they're claiming that, and that the officers here have drafted those technical reasons. What you've been asked to is consider whether you want to allow more time for the applicant to address those concerns and bring back revised plans. If at the end of that period they haven't satisfied you, then you revert to those reasons for refusal because you have set those out very clearly.
Yes.
Oh, so some can have 2 or 3s and only some can have just 1. I just need to know the rules. So my concern is that if we were to go with a refusal, which I could would go to a refusal, I'll probably be done and dusted. Our position is clear. It's how this would look at any potential appeal. Are they likely to pack their bags and say, well, that was a good go, wasn't it? Or are they likely to come back with something completely different or take this one to appeal? Where if we were to lose the appeal, we wouldn't have had the benefit of saying we tried, and we might have had the worst option. That would be, now if somebody can assure me that if we do proceed with the complete refusal and we would challenge that appeal, I'd like to know that we would have more than 51% of defending that appeal, because otherwise, you know, it's a high risk strategy.
No
and referral, we will risk nothing.
I know that we can't guarantee any appeal, so I wouldn't even guess on, you know, we've got good reasons for why we refuse, but whether an inspector agrees with us, we can't ever be in control of, I don't think. As we've learned from many appeals recently, what I would say is we may be seen to be unreasonable because we were not willing to have this conversation, and that would have an impact with costs. Right, going to move on to speakers now. The first speaker speaking under standing order number 44 is Councillor Vizard. Councillor Vizard, you got a good time last time, so in the spirit of this being a quicker agenda item.
I've not even written a speech, so you'll be happy to know that. And I think actually,
Chair, just to help. So we are addressing the deferral. That's what we're debating, the deferral. That's okay.
We'll have to put up with it, or I'll shout. So happy to put up with it. Okay. So it's slightly frustrating to be back here again so soon, having made a great deal of effort last time. However, I do understand the issue in front of you this evening. I think it's important just to remember, and it's been said already, that the resolution, it was resolved to refuse it at the last meeting. I'm not sure it was understood by press or public that was a minded to situation, which would need to come back for reasons given. Although, you know, I accept that was what was decided, but I'm not sure that has played publicly as you might think. So be mindful of that. Any new application, any revised application, if you agree to defer tonight, needs to address all of the reasons that were cited for refusal, and comprehensively so. So my concern this evening is that, and I think what you need to ask yourselves is whether the likely amendments that are going to be put forward under the same application, that it is the same application, it can't be a fresh one, will be substantial enough to address the quite significant reasons for refusal, or whether there is actually a more fundamental problem with this application, which is my concern, I have to say. I think this is your decision tonight, so I'm not going to say you should do this or do that. And I do understand, and there's the reason why I'm not saying that is because I am also concerned about the potential that they will just go to appeal if we don't give them the opportunity to diverse. But I think that has to be judged in balance. I'm not going to tell you what I think you should do, but I think you need to be careful with your discussions and decisions tonight. So that's all I want to say, really. Just to remind you of the decisions, strong decisions made by an overwhelming majority, not by everybody. And I understand some of the Councillor Light spoke very powerfully. I thought actually at the last meeting made some very good points about the need for housing. But just to reiterate that again, remember that conversation last time round and make sure that the discussions and the decision that you take balances those two risks this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Vizard. I'm not going to go with questions this time because we're speaking to the deferral rather than to the application, not because I'm trying to stop the debate. I just think we probably questioned Councillor Vizard enough last time. I'd also like to call a supporter in favour of the application who I may allow questions to because we didn't get great answers to the questions last time. So if Neil Howells is coming forward. Good luck. It'll make the same noise as it did before. Can you get 3 minutes and I'll give you a shout?
Would you rather me turn this off? Was it?
I think for the people at the back and the recording, you're going to have to use the wobbly noise, I'm afraid.
No problem. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Neil Howells, Head of Development of Student Roost, who are the joint applicant with Devon and Cornwall Police for this application. Student Roost is a national operator of purpose-built student and co-living accommodation, providing a premium offer to key towns and cities across the UK, with over 20,000 residents living in more than 50 properties. We are not yet represented in Exeter and are keen to invest the £90 million in developing this site to create one of the highest quality residential schemes in the city. As previously discussed, the proposals will meet an identified need for key worker accommodation and graduates as well as students. The proposals are also consistent with the emerging Exeter local plan, which seeks to build 12,000 new homes on brownfield sites in the city over the next 20 years. As you may be aware, at the previous planning committee on the 5th of September, the members of the committee resolved to refuse the application on several technical grounds. Having listened to the debate last month, it was clear that the principle of development was not being questioned. It was the details associated with the proposals which raised concerns. Concerns regarding height, massing, design, siting, landscaping, amenity impact on surrounding properties, internal and external amenity concerns for future users, and tree loss were all cited. These are all matters which can be addressed within the scope of the current proposals, and following a detailed review of the application following the last committee, we are committed to making significant changes to the proposals to address your concerns. However, due to the time-sensitive nature of delivering student accommodation, it is imperative that these changes are made to the current application and not through a new submission. Subject to your resolution this afternoon, we are committed to taking the proposals to the South West Design Review Panel later this month and engaging with you through officers on the amendments you wish to make to address your concerns. We have worked positively with officers over the past 2 years to get to the point where they felt able to support the proposals. As such, we are confident that through officers, we can make the amendments that you are seeking to develop a scheme which meets the identified needs in a form which addresses the concerns you have. We urge you to support our request for a short deferral to enable the scheme to be amended. This will ensure the redevelopment of this key gateway site, which is so important to the police authority and ourselves, but will also enable the creation of a high quality scheme consistent with the ambitions of the City Council without the harm that led to the previous resolution to refuse. Thank you.
About to stop you. You just made it in time. Thank you very much. I'm going to allow a few questions to you because last time we didn't have somebody who could really answer the questions, and I actually think in the case of the deferral, you might be able to put some people's minds at ease. Does any Councillor Mitchell? I could have guessed who was going to ask a question, but Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Could you tell us how long you would see this deferral period lasting?
We'd like it to be for 2 months. Give us 2 months and bring it back in December, ideally. We feel that that's a reasonable timescale. We intend to take the revised design, the Southwest Design Review Plan at the end of October, and then have a period beyond that to make further changes. I think 2 months is a possible.
If we made the decision to continue with the decision we made at our previous meeting to refuse it and not go for the deferral, does that have any impact on this 2 months determination of fresh plans being submitted?
Sorry,
The impression.
To answer the question, you either defer or you refuse. He
Yeah.
won't be resubmitting an application if we refuse it. Yeah.
If we refuse the application, are you still in a position to submit new plans in 2 months' time?
we'd have to consider options at that point once we've been refused.
I think if we refuse, we offer them another option. Yes. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Moore and Councillor Hannaford, and then I'm going to move on with the debate. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to present and also taking on board what the committee decided last time. But in terms of process, I appreciate very much that you've been working with the officers to bring this forward. But in terms of how the processes and the constitution of the council, why should we make an exception in this case, and would that not be setting a precedent for other applicants who were refused at a previous committee?
On that point, I'm fairly confident I have been in a planning committee where we've done this before. So where we've gone to look to refuse and then we've deferred. So this isn't a precedent that he's setting, it's one we've previously set for ourselves. And even Councillor Newby, who'd love to disagree with me, is agreeing, having sat on the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's.
You're not with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got the golden mic, like the golden ticket. Can I get some sort of assurance from you? Clearly, the decision to decline your application, refuse your application, was quite substantial in terms of the massing, the scale, the density, the design. How realistic is it to expect that the deferral, if you were to comply with most of the stipulations from the planning committee, might then undermine your business model if we're talking about taking floors off, or a substantial reduction, or even a significant reduction in some of the units? How does that sit with your business plan? Would it still stack up? Would it still be viable, or would then things go down another route?
Well, I think we've listened to as we said, we've listened to the debate at the last committee. We've seen the reasons for refusal, and I think we believe that there are changes that we can make to the scheme that address those concerns. Now, obviously, there's a limit to the changes that can be made, but we feel that with a combination of changes, and you're absolutely right, the main concerns are over scale and mass and height, and we feel, and the setting of the building, particularly along Heavitry Road. And we feel that there are changes that we can make to the building that will have a significant impact to address those concerns.
Thank you very much for your time. Right, I'm going to move to the debate. I'm going to start with Councillor Sutton, who's already got a hand up. Anybody else? Just stick your hands up.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank Councillor Vizard and Mr. Howes for their contributions. I'm going to speak in support of the move for the deferral. I can do it without trashing my iPad, for a number of reasons. To start with Councillor Vizard's point about people not being entirely clear about what happened last time, and I don't wish to be patronising to either Councillor Vizard or to members of the public, but planning law is really complicated, and for most people, until the point at which a development happens close to them and they start taking an interest, it is something of a mystery. But the point I would like to make is, when we made the decision at our September meeting, we made the decision on the basis of the presentation we had and the information in front of us and the debate that we had, which was that we were minded to refuse the application, and that the officers would bring back reasons for refusal at this meeting, which is what they have done. But what we didn't know at the time, and which has happened in the interim, is the applicant has come back to the City Council planners and asked for a deferral, and agreed that deferral. So I'm not surprised that there's an element of confusion, because the situation has changed, and that is the kind of information that isn't hot news, so may well not have been disseminated, and it may be new to people this evening, but that's the situation that we are in. It is inevitable and correct that there will be development on this site. It's a brownfield site in the city, not slap bang in the city centre, but pretty darn close, and it's entirely appropriate that we should have development on that site, and the owners of the site have purchased it with that in mind. And I would just remind people that if we're not going to build on brownfield sites, almost inevitably there will be more development on greenfield sites and applications for the landscape setting around the city. We do need more homes for people, as has already been referenced. Councillor Light said at our previous meeting, there is a need for homes, and we have to provide them somewhere, and certainly in my view it's better that we should provide them on brownfield sites rather than encroaching on the outskirts of the city. But what I want to see, and I'm confident that other members of the committee feel the same, is I want to see the best possible application in front of us to be determined. And I welcome this opportunity Mr. Howells and his colleagues have offered us, that they intend to produce new plans that actually address the potential reasons for refusal that we came up with a month ago. I also welcome the fact that they want to take it back to the design review panel, which is an important step in the process. Frankly, I think they are doing anything that we could expect of them, because they did have the option of not asking for a deferral and potentially appealing a decision that we made. So I would implore the rest of the committee to agree to this deferral. Let's put our trust in what comes back and hope for a much better application to determine in a couple of months' time. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jobson. Thank you. Having listened to the answers to the questions posed right at the beginning of this session, the problem, it seems to me, is that it's a revised application. It's not going to be a fresh set of plans. So we are still dealing with buildings that we decided on the last occasion were just not appropriate for this particular site. And there are all the excellent reasons set out in the officer's report. Therefore, it is a very finely balanced decision, because one always has to remember that there is a risk of appeal. But of course, there may not be an appeal. When you read this officer's report, it is pretty clear why this particular design was opposed. So I'd like to thank Neil Howells, who came and spoke to us, but he's not giving me any assurance that this is going to be a substantially different scheme. And it's difficult to see how you can, for instance, create in the current design nice spaces for people to exercise and have some fun when they were internal courtyards last time, unless you are going to substantially reduce the number of properties. I think the other thing, I would agree with Councillor Sutton, this is a site that needs to be developed, and it needs to be developed for homes. Are these homes that are being planned, or are they dormitories? And the current design and what we saw in the plans and everything else, they weren't homes, they were dormitories.
And I can't get any reassurance from Mr. Howells that it's going to be that substantial that it is worth deferring. If they want to develop this site, they know what the objections of this committee were. They know why we refused at the last planning application. They can go away and they can come back with a substantially different design that would meet the needs of residents of Exeter, particularly key workers and those who need homes to get homes, not the scheme that's before us today. And on balance, and again, I say it is a finely balanced decision, but my concern is that this is just putting it off while we tinker around the edges. It needs a wholly new scheme for this site. I hope that the developer will go away and give us a wholly new scheme for this site that will provide what we need. But I will be voting in favour of continuing to refuse this application.
Firstly, none of our grounds for refusal with use of the building. So that's going to be a pretty rocky situation to be on, the argument you've just made. Just, you know, I'm not going to tell a barrister how to do a job because she's better at it than me, but that, I don't think that one's going to fly. I'm just going to move across to Councillor Lights, then Councillor Moore, okay?
Yeah, everybody knows my feelings on this already, so I won't reiterate. Completely support what Councillor Sutton said, but I do just want to make a point in response to Councillor Jobson that I don't think we get to determine what a suitable home is for a person that wants to live in a building. If they live in the building and they feel it's their home, then it's their home, whether it's a dormitory or a flat, or as we discussed last time, maybe they're not a homeowner, maybe it doesn't have a big sunny garden, that's still a home. A lot of people are now living that way and quite happy to live that way. I don't think that we should even really be having that discussion on behalf of people who are, you know, currently living with parents or living out of town, commuting into Exeter because they can't find a home in the area that they want to live in. So I would completely support a revised application, but just to reiterate that I support it in the first place because people need places to live.
Thank you very much. Earlier, I think you confirmed that there would be no more community consultation on a revised application.
Yes.
There would be.
Yeah.
So that would go through a full community process.
It was spent 21 days.
Yeah.
The consultation as is standard.
Okay, so I think that's really quite important, but I am concerned that the changes to the application wouldn't be significant in terms of the reasons for the refusal that was given. And I am concerned that the applicant does take on board the comments about amenity, which we did raise before.
Right. Everyone who was here knows I voted against this application last time, despite what I think was an excellent speech by Councillor Lights. I think she made some good points, but we weren't happy with the application. Now, if we defer this, we can still refuse it. I think we've lost sight of that. We're just putting off a refusal in that case, but we are, Councillor Mitchell, I am summing up from me, but I will let you come in a minute before I go to the vote. So I think for clarity that needs to be there. I also, we can't say what the new, like I haven't seen plans for what the new proposal might be. You definitely haven't. We can't assume that it's going to be terrible if we've not seen it. I think that is something that we, you know, we may have not been moved by the last one, but I'm hoping that perhaps they are listening to us now. So that's be a bit careful with that assumption. I think this application would have to come back. It would be able to be refused for all the reasons given before, assuming that the application is terrible. They can still go to appeal either way, but they won't go on non-determination because we're going to have that conversation. Why would they ask us to do this if they were going to then non-determine and go to appeal anyway? Might as well let's just refuse it. So for the reasons given above, despite my previous vote, which to be honest is still very much in the back of my head, but I will take any new application or any amended application with fresh eyes, I'm going to vote for the deferral because I think it's a good idea. I'm also going to let Councillor Mitchell have a very tiny last word.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I support the views you're putting forward. I will be voting for deferral. I believe the existing application is totally unsuitable for the site, and we've given our reasons for that. The developer says they have listened. The developer says they're going to be back in 2 months' time. The public are going to have their right of say again. and we have the right to refuse again. And I just hope they come back with something a lot better second time around. Thank you.
So I'm going to put the deferral to the meeting. Would somebody like to second it? Councillor Sutton has happily done that. All those in favour of deferring the application for further?
9, Chair.
Okay. In which case, I'll take against and abstains. All right, those against? And no abstentions. In that case, we're going to put our reasons for refusal on ice somewhere. And, you know, you've seen them, so hopefully you take them away and really do look at them, because they were strong reasons for refusal. It wasn't just we weren't quite sure. We really were very sure. And I look forward to seeing it back by December. Thank you. And then we'll go on to item number 2, which is the application for the Royal Clarence Hotel, Cathedral Yard, Exeter. And I think Matt Simon's going to lead on this one.
This is 2 applications you'll be determining this evening. One is a full application and the other is a listed building consent application. I think you all know the site, the Royal Clarence Hotel, Cathedral Yard. The applicant, Mr. James Brent, will be speaking a little bit later. The application description is as per the screen: reconstruction and extension of the building, including partial demolition and repair of remaining building fabric, following the extensive fire damage, to create commercial food and beverage units, ground floor and residential units from 1st to 5th floor. So normally when I present to you, I'd usually describe the application in full and show all, or at least most of the planning drawings. I'm not doing that tonight because there are a lot that have been submitted for this application, as you might expect for a complicated site such as this, and also with all the listed building consent components that go with it. So I'm going to just focus on the key issues this evening. Also, we have produced a detailed report for you to consider, which does have links to the application drawings, which I hope you've seen, as well as the drawings that were submitted for the previous application, that was submitted in 2017. So the first slide is just a quick run through the timeline of what's happened. As you all know, the hotel burnt down in October 2016, which destroyed most of the buildings on the site. So there were three listed buildings on the site, which left some of the listed building fabric remaining. Immediately, works were carried out on site to stabilise that fabric to prevent it from falling down. And that was consented retrospectively in July 2017. And throughout 2017, a revised application, or a couple of applications, were prepared to rebuild as a hotel with an extension on the top floor to provide more accommodation. And that was granted in December 2017. A couple of years later, we then had a listed building consent that was allowed for some further demolition works on site and some minor changes to the permissions that had been granted before for the hotel. And then in 2020 and 2021, the site was sold to the current owners after the previous owners withdrew because they determined that rebuilding the site as a hotel was no longer viable. And the current applicants carried out pre-application consultation with the council officers as well as Historic England on a revised scheme. Public consultation was carried out in December 2021 for that scheme, and then the current applications were submitted in February of this year, which are for 23 apartments on the top floors and commercial uses, including a restaurant and a pub on the ground floor. So part of what this application is about, and what the previous application was about, is about preserving the listed building fabric that is on the site. So this image shows one of the spine walls that's still standing on the site, which has been there for hundreds of years and tells a story of the history of this building that has changed over time. So when you're dealing with listed buildings, it's really important that you try and preserve them. So as with the same with the previous proposal and this proposal, the idea is to design a scheme whilst retaining as much of the building fabric as possible. And obviously the spine walls are a key component of that. This application also includes further partial demolition works. As you'll note from the planning committee report, this photo shows the rear of 6 Martins Lane, and it is the part of the demolition works of the current proposal that it's fair to say has been the most sensitive in terms of the eyes of historic England. So whilst the scheme includes some we might describe as minor demolition works, this section of the building facing onto Martins Lane, adjacent to the bank, will be removed completely. And the reason for that is because, quite simply, since the hotel burnt down, the remaining fabric has been exposed to the elements and the weather for several years, and is beginning to degrade significantly to the point where it is quite simply unsalvageable, or it would take so long to try and restore, it wouldn't make the scheme viable anymore. So this shows some photos of some of the degraded timber in that part of the building that I just showed you. And that justifies why the partial demolition works are necessary. So what this scheme and the last scheme is about balancing the good and the bad. So whilst normally you try and preserve listed buildings as far as you can, in this case, obviously, whilst the site remains derelict, it is causing harm to the historic environment. So that is harm to what's left on the site in terms of the listed buildings that remain, harm to the character of central conservation area, and harm to the setting of all the listed buildings around it. And as you'll see from the committee report, there are lots and lots of listed buildings around it, some of very high significance, including obviously grade 1 and grade 2 star listed buildings. So one of the key benefits, as with the last application, is to rebuild the key elevations of the site. So this slide shows the Cathedral Yard elevation, and I've included comparison with the 2017 scheme, which is the scheme below, and the current proposal is the scheme at the top. Now, as you can see, there's very little difference between what's proposed. Apologies, my pointer isn't working very well. In terms of the main frontage of the building, in terms of the warehouse and what was the Royal Clarence Hotel and the bank, that will be restored, sorry, up here, as it was with the 2017 scheme, except for some very minor differences. So to grant access to the residential apartments on the top floors, what was a window will become a doorway. As with the 2017 scheme, the proposals include an extension to the roof, a 4th floor, and a much smaller 5th floor set back into the rear corner. This proposal, it's a much simpler design. It's an aluminium mansard roof, which is actually very slightly lower than what was granted permission before, which was a slightly more contemporary design. However, the 5th floor, which is much smaller, is very slightly higher. And this slide again shows the other key elevation, the Martins Lane elevation, with this current proposal on the left, and what was granted permission in 2017 on the right. And again, you can see that the key facade of the bank will be restored and rebuilt. There are some differences. So where number 6 Martins Lane is to be demolished, in the current proposals, that will be rebuilt in a much simpler design, a more classical design than what was permitted in 2017, which was more contemporary. The other difference is that the the Manzab roof will extend a little bit more forward towards St Martin's Lane, albeit, as you'll see on the next few slides, you won't be able to see it because of the tightness of the surrounding streets. So these are perspective views of the proposed development. And as you can see, top left, the main frontage will be rebuilt and restored as it looked like before the fire. As you can see in the three other images, top right and the bottom images, you can just at this distance see and make out the additional top floor story. But certainly from this distance, we think that it is quite recessive and not really very noticeable. As you move further away, coming back along Cathedral Close, that's where you'll be able to see a little bit more of the fifth floor story on the roof line. And that is something that is a little bit contentious and what we describe as causing less than substantial harm. And it's something that in design terms isn't ideal, but it's something that is necessary in order to deliver this scheme. And as officers, we don't think that the harm it causes is bad enough to outweigh the positive benefits of redeveloping this site and all the benefits that go with it. As you can see on the two views on the right-hand side, looking down at Catherine Street and from Queen Street, the changes aren't really going to be noticeable in terms of the roof extension. So, conclusion, the applications will provide what we describe as substantial benefits, and these are listed on page 127 of the agenda reports pack. We think that the public benefits outweigh the harm of the partial demolition works that are necessary and the fifth floor roof extension on the historic setting. The proposed uses of residential and the commercial use on the ground floor are completely acceptable in planning terms, and they will enhance the vitality of the city centre and the cathedral precinct. And because, in our view, there won't be any harm to the heritage assets on the site, the presumption favours sustainable development in the NPPF applies, because we do not have a 5-year housing land supply, and this proposal will deliver new housing on the site in a sustainable location. So the recommendations are to approve both applications, planning application subject to a Section 106 agreement and conditions, which are included in the update sheet, and also to approve this building consent, again subject to its own conditions. I'm happy to answer any questions. Unfortunately, our heritage officer can't make it because he's sick, so I'll do my best with any technical heritage questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Matt. Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? I've got Councillor Moore. Anybody else? No? Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much, and good to see this proposal coming forward to this committee. Just got a couple of sort of bit technical questions. Just like to know about the conditions. So in the report it talks about Heritage England having concerns about the structural works, and the condition says that it needs to be signed off by the City Council. Do these works also have to be signed off by Heritage England in order to be fully meeting the condition? That's one question. And the second question is around sort of how the site will work in practice. So the waste and recycling team have highlighted that the residential bin store has bin chutes, and they often get blocked and cause lots of issues and don't encourage recycling. So I just wanted to know what discussions you've had with the applicant about that and how that will be managed. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, Historic England, the Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings have obviously looked at the proposals and submitted some detailed representations, and both raised issue of the structural works that are necessary and not providing the detail that would ideally be provided at this stage. But both have said that if the council was to proceed and grant permission, then we could do so subject to pre-commencement conditions. That's something that myself and the Heritage Officer have looked at and considered, and so we've drafted a condition to deal with that issue, as well as a number of other issues that have been raised by Historic England. So we don't need Historic England's permission to approve that condition, but we'll certainly consult them when the application to discharge that condition is submitted. That, yeah, for structural works condition number 4. And in terms of the bin chutes, yeah, I noted our waste and recycling team's comments as well, and I have discussed that with the developer. And the issue is that the bin chutes would empty into 3 large bins when I think 8 are necessary in total to provide 4 for normal domestic waste and 4 for recycling. And initially I was considering a condition that would require the bin chutes to only be used for one or the other, so either recycling or for normal waste, as opposed to a mix. Having discussed that with the applicant, we realised that could be covered by the waste audit statement. So that's a standard condition that we add to major developments that deals with how waste is to be managed during the construction of a development, but also during the operational phase of a development. And that is required to meet Devon County Council policies. So that would cover that issue in terms of how that was managed to ensure it was dealt with sustainably.
There are no other questions. I'd like to move on to the public speakers. We have, first of all, Malcolm Gigg speaking as an objector. Mr. Gigg, you get 3 minutes and I will let you know when your time is up. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to talk before you today. I'm talking on behalf of the owners of the adjacent property, 18 Cathedral Yard. I need to be very clear that I'm not objecting to the principle of development of this site, simply 3 specific elements in the design that currently have an impact on the adjacent property that have been rebuilt following the Royal Clarence fire. I note from the office's report that our concerns raised and submitted on the 30th of March of this year have not been incorporated into any of the revised drawings, and this means that I'm here before you this evening. Item 1, the issue is overlooking and leak of flame between the 2 properties. As you can imagine, this is a great concern from our clients who have taken the time to rebuild their building in line with the approved drawings. The concern is from 3 of the proposed bedroom windows. 2 of the windows are adjacent and 1 of them is approximately 300 millimeters to the side of another window, which would create a fire leak. The proposed drawings indicate that the windows are to be within facing 2 meters of each other from windows of the new apartments to the existing apartments, which we feel is unacceptable. And in one location, as I've said before, is 300 millimeters, so this is a concern for fire. The greatest concern is loss of privacy to the existing apartments. Item 2, the drawings appear to allow access onto a Lamb Alley that divides the 2 properties at ground level. Though this alley is in the ownership of my client, we are aware that there is no right of way for access onto this alley, and therefore this would make the ground floor unimplementable, sorry. Item 3, the top floor proposed balcony has no privacy screen provided to the side elevation, and as it is elevated on the 5th floor, looks over my client's current balcony, this creating overlooking. A simple fixed screen at 1.8 meters high for the length of the balcony side would be sufficient to overcome this issue. Therefore, can I ask if this is added into any decision? In conclusion, we feel that the proposals as designed will negatively impact the amenity of my client's existing apartments, and due to the proximity of one of the windows, create an unacceptable fire risk, as the bedroom window on the proposed, under building regulations, would need to be fixed shut, fire retardant glass.
therefore making the window impossible to open and the room reliant on mechanical ventilation only. Access to Lamb Alley is not permitted, and therefore it would need to be taken into account in the design for escape from the proposed building. The top floor balcony needs a simple privacy screen added to remove overlooking, and we feel that this is a sensible solution to the problem. We'd be grateful if you could take these into account in determining this application. Thank you.
I'm going to take some questions in a minute if that's all right with you, but first of all, could I ask the officer to address the issues that have just come out of that, please?
Yeah, I'm not too sure if Mr. has read the committee report or the conditions, but the issues you've raised have been addressed in the officer's report, and conditions are drafted. Condition 16 that deals with the obscured glazing for the 2 windows that potentially. Pardon?
Still open. So when the obscurity's there as long as they're closed.
Yes, but in terms of the planning issue of overlooking and privacy, that can be addressed through providing obscured glazed windows. And the condition 17 requires a privacy screen to be provided for the terrace on the 5th floor. Well, that would be a building regulations matter. So that's not something for the planning application stage. So that would be a building regulations matter that would be dealt with under that process.
It's a constant frustration for us that things like that happen, but they are not matters for this planning committee. They are for the building regs. Yeah, sorry.
When we design
Yeah, and I can completely appreciate that, but I only have the application in front of me, and it's, you know, it's like smells coming off things, environmental health, deal with it. It's not our problem, you know. Yeah, sorry. And the access to Lamb Alley.
Again, I'm not too sure that is a planning issue. The red line doesn't include Lamb Alley, so it's not indicating that it would be used as part of this proposal. That, again, the red line doesn't include Lamb Alley.
So again, I'm sure you know more about this more than I do, but you know, it's my position is that we can grant planning permission for land that is not owned by the person who's asking for the consent. It's up to them to negotiate the outcome of it, even if it can't be implemented. It's just for us to look at the application in front of us. I don't know what else to say. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Moore.
So I just want to clarify understanding of where Lamb Alley is. So I'm just showing you the app. Is it just here?
It runs parallel up the side.
Up there?
Yeah.
All the way up there. Okay. So if everybody else, it's just up the side here, just to check that I've understood it right. Thank you. And have the owners of the building not approached you to discuss that?
They haven't approached us as agents. My client doesn't live in this country, so they may have approached him, but he's certainly not mentioned it to me. He's the one who's asked me to speak this evening.
Thank you very much for your time.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now in favour, do I have James Brent or Tony Hopwood? I don't know which one I'm getting. James Brent, thank you very much. You know the score, 3 minutes, and we'll give you a shout when you're running out of time.
That's very kind, thank you. And can I just start with a thank you to members of the council for the time that they're giving us tonight, but also the considerable time that has been afforded to us by officers and Historic England over the course of this application. It does feel like a very long period of time. We've been and thanks also to our advisors and my own team. So we clearly understand the emotional connection that the Royal Clarence building has with residents and visitors to the city, and we're very keen to see it return to its former glory, to be enjoyed once more. When we bought the site, we did, as Matt has explained, we did do a viability assessment of the consented scheme, the hotel scheme, and it was probably the most non-viable scheme that I have come across. So it wasn't marginally viable, and that clearly has since been impacted by both COVID and the proposed opening of the Indigo just down the road from us. We did look at a host of different options, and our focus was really primarily balancing scale and preservation of what remained of historic fabric as key considerations. So we believe that the scheme that we come back with, as the planning officer has outlined, and bringing back the ground floor into commercial use and providing active frontage, and then providing much needed housing in the city centre in line with other residential developments in Cathedral Yard. So we think it's a good scheme. It is a very difficult building to regenerate. The fire has damaged much of the fabric, again, as the planning officer has outlined, and the structure, and the weather damage that has since followed has also been a challenge. So with both Historic England, the Conservation Officer, the planning officers, we have come up with a scheme that we think is a good scheme for the asset, and also really important. It's subservient to the Cathedral and other Grade 1 and Grade 2 style listed buildings in the yard, and so we think it sits well. The proposed restaurant bar units on the ground floor will allow public access to a much loved asset and showcase previously unseen historic fabric, whilst the homes above will increase the vibrancy in the city centre. And we think it will regenerate a key city centre site and will revamp the Cathedral Yard setting. If I may, I'd just like to address a couple of the issues that have been raised in a bit more detail. Thank you. I'll do it very quickly. It is somewhat ironic that the FAR started number 18, yet the complaints against the application is arising from number 18 to the works that we're doing to readdress the damage, but good to see that they have significant focus on fire risk. So just addressing a couple of issues with the windows, the size, the number of windows in the elevation overlooking 18 Cathedral Yard is significantly reduced when compared with the previously consented scheme. And there are conditions, as the planning officer has indicated, proposed to make the windows and glass balustrade from obscured glass. So that is interesting. Sorry. Okay. Should I address fire exit? No. Okay.
Someone asked you about it, but I'm very strict on my 3 minutes. So I can't mention anything. Then he went, "Oh, everyone's got questions." Councillor Hannaford, Councillor Newby, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask you about fire exits to get that one in first.
I'll ask you about fire exits so you can get that one done firstly. But secondly, Chair, clearly, should we be minded to grant your application this evening? There is I think, a strong appetite to get the Cathedral Green totally regenerated and back into full use again. So I know it's very difficult at the moment with the economic situation in the skills, etc. But perhaps you could just briefly outline your timescales and your ambition to get the site where it needs to be in a timely way, because I think that's an important thing that the residents of Exeter are concerned about.
That's very kind. So if I could just start with the fire risk. So the fire exit shown on the drawings is the existing fire exit from number 43 to 44, the High Street, which was also damaged by the fire that emanates from number 18. It's not within the fire egress strategy from our building, and so we will not need to speak to the owners of number 18 about it. As far as timing, again, we sort of share your ambition to crack on with it. You're quite right. It is a understatement, a very challenging environment that we face. Following, if we are successful in the planning application today, we go into detailed design, which is a circa 4-month process. We will recheck the viability against further stats. The build period is conservatively about 70 weeks, so I'm afraid it won't be up and running. It will take a couple of years, I'm afraid. Apologies for that. But.
Thank you. Councillor Newby?
I need to ask a question.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell?
The other end of it, we know when it's going to be finished. When do you intend to start? Get granted permission.
Right, thank you. So in terms of the detailed design work, that would start shortly after this. We've got our professional team lined up, and that is about a 4-month process. We would then have letting of contracts. I say we do need to do a viability check again at the end of the 4-month period, which is standard practice. But subject to that being okay, it's then looking at letting contracts, and then it's into a 70-week build period. So as I say, it's as compressed as it can. That 70 weeks is conservative, so it may be possible to improve on that.
work on site could be commencing next summer?
It could. That was, that's tight. I mean, that's assuming that it all goes according to plan.
I think we all know how the construction industry is working at the moment, Councillor Mitchell. Thank you, Mr. Brett, for your time. Thank you. Right, I'm going to open the debate. Councillor Hannaford, Councillor Bialik. Oh no. Oh, sorry. Do you really want to speak here?
So, just like to sum up the situation from officers. I will be doing this on a regular basis now at committee, and I'll be very brief before you debate. So, I think it's fair to say the principle of this mixed-use development is supported, and it will provide much-needed homes. We don't have enough of those in Exeter, and it will provide active uses, which will, both of things will add more vitality to the city centre. There are other issues that you've heard tonight, and your officers have recommended conditions to deal with those. So what we're left really is the critical issue, really, or issues, which is the impact on those heritage assets and the related sort of design of the new build elements. So the context, as we know, was that catastrophic fire back in 2016. It was national news. Almost 8 years later, almost to the day, we can still see the results of that. There's no doubt that those buildings have probably got worse over that time. They're dangerous buildings, unstable buildings. What remains then is a very damaged group of listed buildings, historic buildings surrounded, as we know, as we see every day, by hoardings and scaffolding. It's a daily reminder of that catastrophic fire, and it's an eyesore, frankly, in what is otherwise a beautiful part of our city. All the experts agree this scheme would result in substantial harm to those listed buildings, or what remains of those listed buildings, especially the demolition of 6 Martins Lane. The question that you need to ask this evening is, are there any exceptional reasons or circumstances that would outweigh the loss of that historic fabric? Second question that relates is the impact of those new build elements on the street scene. So we've taken you through those issues. We have concluded as officers that the new design elements are largely sympathetic. The loss of the historic fabric is regrettable. It's further complicated, of course, by the viability considerations of a very complex scheme. However, your officers do think and believe that a clear and convincing case has been made, and that would enable significant benefits. Possibly more important of all, this proposal would give this iconic building a new lease of life. So your officers do recommend approval. We also recommend conditions which are rigorous and exacting, and those conditions will ensure that all necessary steps have been taken to preserve and conserve the buildings that remain, and ensure that the new design elements meet modern planning requirements and deal with some of the other issues that you've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I've got Councillor Bialik, Councillor Hannaford, and Councillor Sutton before, and then Councillor Moore. Yeah. You can always break the rules. Yeah, no, it's fine. Go on. It's better that you ask the question than you don't, Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation. I just wanted an explanation of the deferred contributions mechanism in relation to the affordable housing, please.
Basically, it's leaving some aspects of the viability appraisal until we're certain about what those factors are when it's actually being built. So in this case, it will be the construction costs, because whilst you can give your best guess normally, say a normal housing site, it's quite easy to calculate costs, but with a site like this, because of the complexity, it's very difficult to be sure what those costs are going to be until it's actually built. And the other issue is the sales prices of the apartments again in a few years' time. So the idea of a deferred contributions mechanism is to basically reappraise it at a later date, much closer to when the site is being built, to establish whether there's any extra that can go towards affordable housing as an off-site contribution. It can go up to the top limit of what we're asking. If there's enough money left over that is above our total obligations asked, then obviously we wouldn't have that. We can only have up to the maximum amount of obligations that we can ask for, as set out in the report. But you might not get them. You might not get them if it's not viable.
I think given the current market, things probably would not be favourable if we were to do it this way. It may be more favourable, it may not. It's a gamble, but either way, it's not the most viable of sites. I think is the brutal truth. You know, as much as I'd like it to be much more viable, I don't think it is. Right, so back to, do you want to be added to the end of the debate as well? Okay, thank you. Right, I'll go back to Councillor Bialik.
Thank you, Chair. I did have on my thing, I wrote down deferred contribution. I don't think I've quite seen it there before. As far as I'm concerned, is it £2,173,238.07? Well, they can have the 7p. I'm not too worried about that bit. You know, but that obviously tells me the sort of those apartments, whether they're going to be rented or sold, what they look like. And I suppose I look at it from what they're not going to be. They're not going to be purpose-built student accommodation. They're not going to be co-living. They're going to be of a reasonable size. And of course, that's what will govern the price and its location. So you could put a couple of ticks, but I feel sure many will bemoan the fact that they're not within the reach of the overwhelming majority of people in Exeter. Let's get real about it. However, I think we really need to see that site and that part of town put right. And from what I can see, I think it will be put right. I get about the height. I don't really think you may, if you sat down, have a peer up there and you may notice it. Will it be a shock to you? I don't believe so. And certainly looking down Queen Street, by the way, if you can deal with that big wall on what used to be C&A, is no, you can deal with that. Is all I'm saying. You can deal with that. There's no two ways about it. And the same at Martin's Lane. It will be nice to walk down there without scaffolding bowls all over the place. So it's going to be a great improvement. I think people want to see it improved. Many of us wax lyrical about the good old Royal Clarence and what it meant to us. But what it really meant to me, I can tell you, was the Well House Tavern. I was in there a few times. The odd dinner, which, let's be honest, you'd have to save up to go in there. So you went occasionally, and I think I had one occasion when I went upstairs in one of the meeting rooms. And I would say that's the majority of where we would have been. So what are we going to get back? We're going to get back a good facility on the lower level with bars. It's what that sort of needs. Most very good restaurant facilities. I think it's going to be excellent. That whole area is our walkway through from the top of South Street right through. And we will get the bollard sorted at the top of South Street at some stage. And I can just imagine it walking through. It is a very good alternative to the High Street, which is very important to us. And going up through there, we will have a good walk through. And you've got the new hotel coming up. So I can just imagine it's exactly what we want to see in that part of town. I think for the future, it has much more interest to us all. So I'm going to certainly at the appropriate time, Chair, at the appropriate time, because I don't want to curtail the debate, is to obviously move that we accept this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I like that Councillor or former Councillor Edwards has St Sybil's Point and an extra care facility, and you've got a bollard in South Street as your legacy. Good to know. Councillor Hannaford.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as has been said, this is an emotive and iconic site in Exeter, and I think It is one of the oldest hotels in the country, and I think according to local legends, perhaps it's the oldest in the UK. So I think we have to acknowledge, for many people in Exeter, the proposal not to reopen the Royal Clarence in its former state as a hotel will be sad for a lot of people across Exeter. And I know what Councillor Bialik has said, but for so many Exeter residents, it was a special place. It was a place for special occasions, anniversary dinners, things that you did perhaps have to save up, and it was used for that. And I think, as has been said by Councillor Bialik, the new proposals will allow that again to happen. But I think we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not going to be as it was before. But then again, it was never going to be as it was before, because even when it was proposed to reinstate it as a hotel, all the new building regulations and things for the internal layout would not be the same as it was before. It would not look the same. It would not operate in the same way, because quite frankly, quite rightly, we wouldn't be allowed to do it because of all of the issues that we understand. But I think in reality, this does offer a very strong way forward. I think the detailed work to reinstall the facade is excellent. And as has been alluded to, I think the larger windows in some of the apartments on the new designs is actually better and more in keeping with some of the other windows around the crescent. And I think as well, we have to be realistic. Although it's not returning to its full use as a hotel, the apartment use is right, it's appropriate, it's already been used around that area as well, for the old Exeter Bank, for example, and the other apartments. And we do have, I think, a very strong wish that we get more residential use back into the city centre. It's more sustainable, more balanced communities, and that's the way forward. So I think all of these are very, very important areas. And I think we have to acknowledge as well, we've got to get this area regenerated and restored. It's not fair on the existing businesses around there. They cope magnificently, but nevertheless, it is a blot on the landscape for Exeter in our probably most sensitive city centre environment. I will just say as well, Chair, the affordable housing contribution on page 98 that's been discussed is important, because these will be luxury, high-end properties. I think, despite whatever market conditions we've got, they will hold their value. Dare I compare it to the golden site, and gold holds its value, and I think these apartments will hold their value, whoever owns or rents them. So I think it's entirely appropriate that there is a substantial contribution to affordable housing in the city, so that we square the circle between luxury housing for those who can afford it, but we help those who can't. So I am very happy to second the approval that's been moved. And I should be voting in favour of this. And I really, really hope, I think probably with everybody else in the room and across Exeter, that these works commence and we get the Jewel of Exeter restored as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaford. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you. Just shortened my speech because Councillor Hannaford and Councillor Bialik have both made points that I was going to say, particularly about the well houses. I spent more time there than I did in the Royal Clarence. And yes, like several people around this table, I've been on that whole 6-year journey, starting with standing in a high-vis jacket on that awful weekend, right the way through to our real optimism and sense of hope when the first application came in, that the hotel would be restored with a modern hotel behind the facade, which turns out not to be, because the world moves on and things change. So we're now looking at, I can't remember how many, 5th, 6th, 7th different application under different ownerships. And it probably isn't perfect, but then I suspect that no application that's ever been before this committee has been perfect. And what we're doing is dealing with the application in front of us and the art of the possible. And I think this is this is pretty good. We are looking at something which is going to have new stories at the top, It will change the view, of course it will change the view, but if you look at all of those buildings around Cathedral Close, I mean, they're pretty higgledy-piggledy. They've grown up over the years, and I can imagine in the past that other people might have looked at what was proposed in some of those gaps and gone, yeah, cool, blimey, that's not going to fit in, it doesn't look like the rest of it, but that actually is part of the joy and the beauty of it, that it does look as if it's developed over time. It reflects its history. And again, if you stand at the access to Cathedral Green from South Street and look up to Prince's Hay, you can actually, if you look hard, you can actually see the top stories of the Prince's Hay apartments, but it doesn't spoil Cathedral Close and Cathedral Green. It's just new and part of what has developed. I note the comments on page 115 of this report with the petition that actually is talking about having replacing the site with a heritage centre. Clearly this petition didn't get a great deal of traction, but in terms of having a heritage centre on Cathedral Green, I would direct the writer of the petition to the Devon and Exeter Institute, which is, I believe, at number 7 Cathedral Close, which is a historic heritage site and does have a library and does welcome students and visitors, and therefore already fulfills quite a lot of those requirements. Going back to bin shoots, yeah, I like Councillor Moore, and obviously the officers looked at that. Bin shoots don't sound like a great idea to me, and they may well be high-end, expensive properties, but surely the residents aren't going to be too posh to take their rubbish down to the basement, please. Yes, I am also going to be supporting the recommendation and voting in favour of this. I can't wait to see that facade renewed and yeah, and popping back into the Well House Tavern. Thank you.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. Yes, I welcome this application. We were, the Director of Planning pointed out that this will cause substantial harm, and but when you consider what the option is, the alternative, it would be worse because it would still be a derelict site and deteriorate further. So I do feel that it's important that this application is supported and brought forward quickly. And I welcome the fact that the developer's actually taken on board the comments that were made at the planning member working group about how it, you know, shouldn't be a pastiche and higgledy-piggledy nature of the that's not a technical heritage term, but the complex richness of the buildings aligning next to one another works in the cathedral's yard. So I think this is to be welcomed. I would welcome Councillor Hannaford has spoken very well about the affordable housing contribution. I fully support that view, and it would be very helpful if in due course we could receive a report back to this committee about what the final figure will be in terms of affordable housing. And just to comment to the developer, because there's so much interest in this site and what's happened to it thus far, it would be really lovely if the developer could see their way to recording their process of restoration and make that publicly available somewhere if that's possible. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I 6 years ago spent a Sunday morning in at the South Gate looking at a smouldering building wearing a high visibility jacket, and first of all deeply upset by the impact of that, but I also never thought in 6 years time we'd still be looking at the remains that I was taking, in fact less of the remains because we had to take it down for safety. It is definitely a scar that reminds us of that terrible weekend, and it, you know, we can't carry on with our Cathedral Green looking like this. I think it is a good application. I don't think it's perfect, but then I don't think we'd have given consent for most of the development that took place on the site previously because it was so disastrously constructed when you went inside. And I think it says a lot for our committee that we spend more time in the Well House than we do the Clarence. So we should probably all take a look at ourselves. So I will be supporting the application, and given that it has been moved and seconded, I'd like to take it to the vote. All those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, Howard. And now,
yep. I think you'll have to make a recommendation on the list of building a decision on the list of buildings.
And, okay, and all those in favour? Excellent. Right, thank you very much. Yeah.
Could I ask that we have a report back on?
Yes,
thank you.
I'm quite happy for that. I don't know what the timescale will be for that, Councillor Moore, and whether any of us will still be on the council at that point, but I will try my best to get that report back to you, okay? The next item on the agenda is item 7, list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. Ian, have you had any requests? Nobody has asked anything? Okay, and agenda item number 8 is the appeals report, which we've been asked to consider. You will notice that one of the appeals was for Celia Crescent, which we did not manage to win our appeal, which we are very sad about, and is a particularly good reason why you all need to engage with the local plan process to try and prevent development on our outlying areas. Ian, anything else you'd like to say?
Just really briefly, so we have organised a full debrief for members who are interested, and we'll circulate the dates for that after today. We've also lined up some, let's call it training. I think I'd rather use the term sort of enlightened discussion with a barrister, the same barrister who fought the appeal for us. And that'll take place a bit later. So I think, because what we want to do with you is go through that whole journey and understand the issues that were played out at that appeal, and see what we can learn from that going forward. So I think it's a good opportunity for us all to sit down and in a safe space and understand what that appeal means for us.
There's no point in these awful things happening if we don't learn from them, unfortunately. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I just wanted as well if you could comment on the issues that were raised in the appeal document about the calculations for the land supply and what's being done to respond to that and implications of that.
That, just to go back to the comment that was made about sitting down with the barrister, that's the conversation we're having, that we'll all be informed about that, but at the moment we're still unpicking that decision, I think is the politest way to put it. I also would like to put on record that we owe a great deal of thanks to the Rule 6 parties that were involved in this application, who did some wonderful work to support the feelings of the committee, particularly Councillor Naomi Alcock, who essentially stood up against about 8 barristers and made her case on behalf of the Rule 6 parties. So I think we should acknowledge that one of our own, who is like the rest of us, does not have any professional experience that way, was outstanding representing her community, and actually for the communities all across the city. So I'd like to thank her for that.
And the final item on the agenda is the site inspection party, which should be held on the 1st of November, and it will be me, Councillor Newby and Councillor Snow should we be holding it. And if anyone can see their way clear to sorting out these microphones so we don't get a migraine every time we have a meeting, that would be outstanding. Thank you.